Welcome to NREI's Common Area Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the award-winning editorial staff at NREIOnline.com. Let's jump right into this week's podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Common Area with your host, David Bodamer. Today, David has brought a special guest on the show. That is Adam Gower, PhD, and he is an authority in content marketing for real estate industry. He has more than 30 years and $1.5 billion of transactional experience in commercial real estate finance and investment. And over the last 5 years, he's built a digital marketing agency at Gowercrowd.com. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
I'm doing
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, Adam, thank you so much for being here. And David, thank you for bringing him on the show. David, why did you bring him on the show? I mean, obviously, we know the bio there, and this fits right with your subject, but why specifically did you bring him onto today's show?
Well, Adam actually brought me onto his podcast not that long ago. We had a really, great conversation. And from that, we have been working together a little more, where Adam has been providing a biweekly column to NREI. And so I thought it would be good, especially, I think when we recorded that was maybe a week or two before we went into lockdown. So even though,
Right.
even though it was only like 3 months ago in real time, it was like a whole other, decade in terms of where we were in the commercial real estate industry. So I thought it would be just good for all those reasons, just to kind of bring you in and check in and have a conversation. So how are you doing?
Well, yes, it's actually interesting times, wasn't it? That we did record that show right before everything ground to a halt. And gosh, it seems like that was a long time ago, actually. And so since then, I would say, a lot of kind of evolution to try and accommodate what is going on and to adapt to the circumstances. So things are going well now. We're extremely busy. But what I did, David, once once it hit, was I actually took down for a period of time all of my content. Unbelievable. Really? Years and years of content that was rotating on social media, because I thought that it was tone deaf, that to be talking about kind of the run-of-the-mill social media content marketing practices, best of class though they were, was to completely ignore the main topic, right? The one thing that everybody really wanted to talk about. So I switched off all systems and actually went into hyper overdrive to replace in sheer volume COVID related content. And so that's what I did for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I think. It seemed like, anyway. Certainly my team, I think, thought that there was like, how did this happen? We were busy before, but we've gone ballistic.
Yeah.
And now I think things are changing again. And so, another phase of this whole cycle is coming about. So I think the answer to your question is we're just adapting as circumstances change.
So could you just talk for a minute about what you do with your company and how you work with your clients, and what are the things that people are coming to you for, and how has that changed in the past weeks and months?
Right. So what we do, and I did say I would tap things out my computer, not using a hammer, but you can probably still hear it, I imagine. I just want to remember one thing, important point. Yes. So what we do is we build sophisticated digital marketing platforms, or content marketing platforms, primarily for real estate developers, so they can raise more money online, right? Basically taking the capital formation process from the analog in-person world to the online world. And to me, this is an extremely exciting job. It's not really a job, it's what I do, but I find it extremely exciting because I spent so much of my career raising money for the deals that I was working on instead of actually working on the deals and finding the deals, that when the regulations actually shifted and allowed us to do this online, it just occurred to me that the ability to leverage one's time by digitizing one's pitch and background and story was just incredible. So I started to build a platform and started to explore all the different techniques that are best of class, used in the industry, but also used by other industries, right? Because they've been using them for a lot longer than the real estate industry, and applying them. And so what we do now is we build best of class content marketing systems for developers. And I think there was another part to your question.
Well, the other part was that, so like, given that backdrop, now we're in this crazy period where I think if we look at like transaction volume, overall, the numbers from that come out for March and April, and didn't come to a complete standstill, but maybe I think April is something like 70% down in volume. So there's a temporary drop in transactions there. And I think there's a period where a lot of people are now doing a wait and see, or trying to figure out where, how to reprice or how to do price discovery right now. So where does that? So then, what are the things that your clients now are asking for in this kind of a climate?
It's interesting. I would say that right now is actually a bit of the quiet before the storm, right? And this is just in terms of the industry. And let me kind of characterize that a little bit for you. There's one word, David, that I've been tracking, actually using Google Analytics quite intensively since almost exactly the time that you and I first spoke, right before this thing really took off, or when I actually took down my content. And that word is the word distressed. Distressed real estate. Now, what happened, and this is consistent throughout all downturns. I remember this explicitly from the last one, or vividly, I should say, from the last downturn. When the market first took its nosedive, everybody kind of went into shock, right? And the same happened this time. It's like, what the heck is going on? And so the idea of immediately perking up to talk about distressed real estate, as some people did, was distasteful very early on, right after you and I first spoke, right? And so what I did was to double down on content just to communicate with the audience, and that's what I advise my clients to do. And so what we did was we adapted all of our communication to incorporate sensitivity to the way that the market and the way that the economy was changing, right? So that was the first phase of what happened, was to just be sensitive to what's going on. What I've noticed, though, as I predicted right at the beginning, is that at that time, the word distressed real estate wasn't used. It was inappropriate, right? It was tone deaf to what was going on. Now, however, that term is becoming increasingly in vogue. In fact, you guys set out, and there's actually been a few people in the industry, high visibility people that I've been communicating with specifically about the use of this term, right? Because you'll know when it's time to really change your approach to what's going on when you see this term being used more and more. And you guys sent out an email that was 100% about distressed real estate.
Yeah,
and
that's why I chuckled.
Right? That was what but you could not have done that 2 months ago.
Right.
But you can now, because it's becoming increasingly what everybody's looking for. So I think that there is a slight slowdown in anticipation, or as people anticipate the deal flow, the opportunistic deal flow that is going to be coming down the pipe over the next few months. The characteristics of this downturn are different than they were last time. And so there are bigger questions, or there's still a lot of questions. But so my clients, as I advise my clients, now is the time to be looking for distressed real estate opportunities, because investors, you're going to have to, if you want to stay in the business and you're not fighting with legacy problems, right? You've got past your legacy issues. You've got that under control. You're now going to have to bring to the table deals with stories, right? Basically, in order to gain the attention of investors.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And like, like I said, I think I did the same thing around starting to search for the word distress right away. And then we also had this plan around, all right, we remembered that, because it wasn't really that long ago. I mean, it was 10 years ago or so, after the Great Recession, we had a long and robust distressed real estate cycle that I think probably didn't even wind down. I looked, and in fact, this newsletter that we relaunched is a relaunch. Distressed Real Estate Strategies is a newsletter we did in the last cycle. We ran it. We started it, I believe, in maybe 2011, and we ran it through 2014. So that's kind of like, at least from our perspective, how long that last distress cycle was something that we were highly attuned to in writing about regularly. So wanted to get us positioned to be able to do that kind of coverage again. And and it wasn't immediate, like you said, and it wasn't for a number of reasons, but I think we are now that we're a couple months in, and there's I think a separation of the real problem, the properties that have real problems from the ones that maybe just needed some time. But I think it does really seem like, from everybody I talk to, and then from all the money that you're seeing that's already being lined up, we are going to have this cycle playing out over the next 18, 24 months. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. So that's certainly I've been talking to a lot of people also about where opportunities are going to be and how they're going to emerge. And there's definitely a sense that it will be played out over a long period of time. There's no doubt about it. One of the reasons that I think that it is particularly timely now, David, for you guys to be dusting off the old newsletter, right, if you can do such a thing online, is that people have become acclimatized to the world, right, with COVID. We know what it is. We're used to it. It's no less scary, but you know what? We're kind of getting used to it. And so people, I think, investors and sponsors, everybody is starting to look for an exit. And in the real estate world, an exit means finding deals, right? Finding opportunity. And so there's certainly a sense that it's going to take some time. The June 1st, actually, which is coming up right next week, will be the first of the month that rent payments were due since lockdowns began. Right. And as you know, that's a really important point, because at that point, loans go 90 days past due.
Right.
And once that happens, they are irrevocably, unless there's some statutory change, they are irrevocably non-performing. And so once that starts to happen, that can start to pile up on lenders' books. And the only way to deal with that is either to take on, well, basically is to, once they become overburdened with non-performing loans, they have to be sold, or there's some way they have to be liquidated,
right,
and got off the book. So it's as we go into the summer that I think we'll start to see opportunities. But there are some really massive players, Dave. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars, very different from what it looked like last time. It's like, how can those massive players not vacuum everything up? Right?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the things I've been, like thinking about as well, is that, again, people, it's not that long ago, a lot of people remember it, so a lot of people are having the same thought, and a lot of money is already queued up. Right. So is it there even the possibility once these things start hitting the market that it's like going to be over, like a feeding frenzy right from the start? So like, what kind of, how are these things going to be priced? Is that going to dip into returns because it's going to be so competitive right from the jump?
Well, there's something else as well that's very different. That is the very nature of the distress this time is different. The last time it was primarily driven by capital stack, right? Excessive debt. I mean, that's certainly the same. That's what creates distress, after all, is the capital stack, right? The inability to service debt. And so once that happens, then you got to work it out, or you got to sell the loan, or whatever happens, right? I mean, it's got to go through the process. This time, though, it's the integrity of the real estate that is changing, or the structure of the real estate. So if you think about restaurants having to have chairs or tables 6 feet away instead of, elbow to elbow, or hotels and the cost structure of hotels, or offices, right? And the climatization that people have to working remotely versus the need for more space per person inside an office building. So in terms of dealing with distress this time and finding opportunities, the narrative has to be not only do we have a good discount on a piece of property, but we also have a plan for dealing with the way that the world is going to look, and the world is going to look different this time. If that is your thesis, right?
Yeah.
If you don't think it's going to go back to the way it was.
Yeah, I think that's dead on, because I wonder what that does mean for, if a restaurant has to reduce the number of tables and therefore can only turn over a certain number of tables per hour or whatever, like what kind of rent are they actually going to be able to afford to pay? So are we going to have to, so the kind of questions that I'm having are, if a restaurant to survive is going to have to adjust, and if they can't make up that revenue through the takeout and other stuff, and they simply can't afford the rent the way it was, and they need a rent reduction, what does that mean for the owner if their loans are based on a certain based on assumptions of higher rents? And so how do you resolve all of that? And is that possible to resolve with the current owner, or is that where the situation where they're not going to, they'd have to default on their loan, and then it's going to be someone else buying the property for less who can get a return on the new lowered rent?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's where price discovery comes in, right? Because if you can, at some price, every asset makes sense. But what is that price? If you're having revenues that are picking a number out of my ear, right? But let's say 50%. For any retail or restaurant business, first of all, can they survive? And is that lack of revenue can it even be compensated for by lower rent? Right. So, I mean, you've got to look at the economics of all of it. Or is it just not possible to function unless you have zero rent? Right. So I think it's not quite the same as simply working through convoluted financial structures that I was used to during the last downturn, where capital stacks were complicated and cash had run out. But you knew once you got to the other side of that, right, be it a bankruptcy or a negotiated workout or whatever it was, that you had a piece of real estate for which you could predict the economics going forwards. This time, that predictive ability has been taken away, and that's what makes it different. I mean, so the word that I've got down here is adaptive reuse, right? The finding opportunities that maybe never existed before. I mean, I've seen talk of hotels being adapted to multifamily use, for example, or to senior housing, which has its own problems as well, of course. But what other kinds of applications? Those are the things that are most interesting to me, is to see what creative solutions people are coming up with for assets that are potentially obsolete now.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be fascinating to watch, or to see who if there is this continued shakeout with the retailers and fewer retailers to go around, what other kind of uses can go into those kind of spaces that aren't your traditional retail, which is certainly something we've already been experiencing in recent years, but just an acceleration of that. And I mean, I think I've heard some, there's interest among some kind of tenants that have typically been in medical office, but are more open to having like a presence in a retail setting, practices that have that kind of thing. So we could see, acceleration of that as a potentiality for a way to fill some of the vacant retail space. But I think, I guess like ultimately what it seems like to me is that we're going to, these are the kinds of these periods are the times in which the most creative and innovative developers and investors kind of like thrive, because this is the ones who can figure this stuff out. This is their time, as opposed to the time when everything's clicking and you just
Exactly.
buy a core asset, you got it rented up, you just collect your income, and you get the whatever property depreciation that happens. But it's fairly, it's nothing's ever easy, but I mean, it's a little bit easier than if you have to go in and work the real estate.
It's an interesting point, that, isn't it? Because, as we think about it, my sense is that if there is a vaccine, right, for this thing, and everybody suddenly starts to feel comfortable doing everything normally again, then everything we're discussing kind of becomes moot, right? We really just go straight back to the status quo ante, right? Basically, boom, it switches it off. But there are some changes, and the interesting changes, this is what you and I talked about last time, David, was this migration from physical media, in your case, in my case, to actually meeting somebody in person, and this migration to digital, and how it's changed your life as a career journalist or media professional, and mine as a real estate guy. But what's happened during this crisis that's fascinating is this idea that people are now have become much more used to working remotely. And that's something that will be interesting to see. I think that's probably one of the greatest potential changes to the way that the landscape looks post-COVID, is this propensity to work remotely. And if I can and I'd love to hear what you think about this, but let me just share with you a thought that I've had about that, because I've been working in a remote location for about 5 years. It's actually how I ended up figuring out how to work digitally and mastering this art, if you like. And the idea to me that remote working and working, first of all, the idea of working from home and remote working are not synonymous, right? These are not synonymous ideas. Remote working doesn't mean that you have to work out of your house. What it means is that you are remote from the mothership of your company. That's what it means. But I don't think that people want to work out of their homes. That what will happen is that there will be a migration to shared office spaces where you go in, you still have an office environment. You don't have any of the local, the company politics, right? It's all that kind of nonsense, because you're working with other people who are working remotely. And that actually office space that the WeWork idea, for example, was incredibly successful. People loved to work in those spaces. I've been working in, not WeWork, but in a similar, and it is an incredibly productive, enjoyable environment to work out of. What failed with WeWork was not the thesis that people want to work that way. It was the economics of the way their business was structured that failed. And so actually one of the biggest opportunities going post-COVID will be to figure out how to crack that nut.
I think I've now been working remote for, I think I figured out today is actually my 80th day since the last time I was in the office, or even on the subway, which is kind of, I think this is the longest time since I've been in New York without even stepping foot on the subway. It's kind of incredible. we had an open office environment. And I understand that those work for, if you're in a very team oriented group and you've got, a lot of collaboration, that's great. I actually find, given we're doing a lot of writing and editing and posting and stuff, like our team has functioned fairly well just doing this 100% work from home thing, collaborating on Slack and Microsoft Teams and Zoom, and using all these, just trying all these things out. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens for my own company, in addition to just the New York office market in general, because I think there is going to be this new mix of things where we discover the kind of roles that thrive more in those environments. And also, frankly, my office, we literally couldn't go back and the way that we were and have the 6-foot separation. So we're going to have to go back in some kind of modified way. So, but yeah, for us, it's worked okay. And I don't think that's worked. My company does a lot of different things. And I think some of the groups are itching to get back more rapidly, but I'm kind of curious to see, how this plays out, particularly in the New York market, where obviously we have all these because one of the things is like, how are we all going to get on off the elevators?
That's right.
So I also don't think it's going to be one of those things where, like, suddenly everybody 100% works from home now, but it's not going to be like that kind of a paradigm shift, but it will be an interesting blend of approaches, and I'm eager to see how it plays out. I think from what my company has been talking about, though, is like we're probably still not looking at even starting to bring people back until maybe the end of the summer.
But, questions still remain. Yeah. David, we've still got a long way to go before we can see through the fog of this whole thing.
You're in California, is that right?
Yes.
So, and then how are things where you sit right now?
Well, I'm actually in a remote location. I'm on the Central Coast in agriculture. I'm surrounded by fields and birds. So I used to live in LA, and I'm have been since we left, particularly thankful now that I'm not in this massive metropolis. So here, life hasn't changed that much. I've just stopped going into this co-working space, and I've been working out of my study here, but I've got a whole studio set up, so it's quite comfortable.
From what you've written for us, hopefully people that are listening to this have a chance to read your columns, but like the advice that you've had about setting up home studios and doing some of these other things online, I think it's been very useful, because you had a running start with all these strategies, and it seems like it's just, you can kind of keep going with them.
Yeah, I get a lot of people comment on that, the way that I put together this thing right at the beginning, how to set up a home studio. And as people kind of become more used to the idea of working from home, not wanting to look like they're in their bedroom, setting something up that is a little bit more polished is good. Yeah.
Have you followed, there's this Twitter account called Room Raider, which has been, following all of the people that are doing the cable news hits from home now, and just kind of rating their rooms and where they're doing their hits.
No,
from.
I haven't, but it sounds like it sounds a bit like the people of Walmart.
Yeah.
You've seen that one.
It is.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. No.
Yeah.
That's
so
funny.
who's got nice bookshelves? Who's got some flowers? Like it is fun, because just you watch cable news, you see these people in the studio all the time. It is kind of funny to now see them all doing this from their living rooms, or in some cases their children's bedrooms. Yeah.
You can see what books they've got on the shelf behind them, right?
Exactly.
Everyone's staging it.
Yeah. Who's thinking about that and who's not? Like, who's put the books there? They're like, oh yeah, they clearly put that book there. Versus, I don't know. Anyway, it's a fun little look into people's lives that we didn't have before.
Yeah, I like that. I'll have a look at that.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast, and very interesting to hear your perspectives on all these things, and appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, and maybe we'll be able to circle back again in a few months and see where everything's at.
David, that would be fantastic. Yeah, it's a real pleasure getting to know you and your team. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Guys, this is fantastic. I've just got 2 comments. Adam, you did a fantastic job, man. I loved it. If you look at the book behind me, which the audience, of course, can't because this is a podcast, you would find front and center the complete Far Side, because that's how my brain works. That's what I've got there.
That's exactly what was in my mind, actually, when I was saying, Billy, you look at the book. Do you want...
Yeah, that's what I've got there. And then, David, a comment for you. From what I've heard, New York is going to make everybody take the stairs from this point forward, 6 feet apart. So good luck with that.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. Please don't write anybody, a congressman, senator, nothing. I made that up, everybody. If you're listening to this, you don't have to take the stairs in a 70-story building, I promise. Well, I'm not going to promise anything.
Goodness.
No
We'd
promise
all get
anything.
a lot fitter if we had to do that.
Yeah, don't give my wife any ideas there, Adam. I appreciate that very much. I work from home,
You know
but
what
it's
I've
3
heard,
stories.
I've heard somebody's talking about, it's not it's not COVID-19. It's COVID plus 19.
Yeah, I'm
Extra
6 pounds into
tonnage
that.
We're all taking on.
I'm 6 pounds into that. Thank you very much for bringing that up. And I do want to shut this down in a timely manner. So, guys, again, thank you so much for being on the podcast, doing the podcast. Adam, you were a great guest. David, thank you again for bringing him here. And the last thank you, of course, goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you so much for listening to the Common Area Podcast with David Bodamer. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when David comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your colleagues. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at NREI, this is Eric Johnson inviting you back in 2 weeks for all the stories that matter to you. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Common Area Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of NREI or Informa. The content has been made available for information and educational purposes only.